The longer you've been in the industry, you kind of feel a bit like a bit of a dinosaur. So there's this constant drive to keep learning, keep developing yourself. Pretty much all of the traditional skills that we have come to value are probably going to come into question. And then it's about us understanding where we can continue to add value and where we should try to develop so that we can maintain our ability to actually do our jobs. We once interviewed a candidate who we asked to prepare a presentation, and I think the presentation was largely AI generated, even to the point where it had a different company's name on the presentation.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today, I welcome Hoa. Hoa, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to meet you, Tim, and thanks for having me on.
It's absolutely our pleasure. And I think what would be a great place to start is just for our audience to learn a little bit about you. Who are we speaking to today?
Yeah, sure. As Tim mentioned, my name's Hoa Truong, and I'm currently the head of data at Equals. Been at the company for about 4 years now, but prior to that, about 20 years in financial services across a number of data science and predictive analytics roles.
And so you've seen a bit of everything in your career, I imagine?
It's one of those where I guess the longer you've been in the industry, you kind of feel a bit like a bit of a dinosaur. So that this constant drive to keep learning, keep developing yourself.
Yeah. And well, I don't know about you, but in the last couple of years, I felt that feeling almost slightly overwhelming at times with the rate of change. It's like, God, like you blink and you've almost missed some development in large language models in particular. Have you felt something similar?
Yeah, definitely with like you say, Gen AI, LLMs, and the fact that this sort of technology is more accessible than ever to everyday, everyday life, and it's trying to differentiate the real opportunity, the real benefit versus the hype.
Yes. And do you feel like at the moment companies are missing more opportunities where they could be using Gen AI, or are they wasting money in opportunities where they shouldn't? Do you have a sense of that balance at the moment from what you've seen?
So I guess from my perspective, I think um, the main thing is around knowing the most appropriate use cases for Gen AI. As whilst it's an absolutely amazing advance in ML deep learning capability, maybe there are cases where more traditional machine learning methods are more appropriate, whether it's from a cost perspective or a speed perspective or an interpretability perspective. I think using is that whole square peg round hole situation. I think we need to just remember that we've got other things in the tool set.
Yeah, and maybe it's not helpful if we just start brandishing the AI descriptor on everything and everything from a Excel spreadsheet with a macro to Gen AI to everything in between. So maybe it'd be helpful if we are a little bit more precise in our language potentially.
And I think it's one of those because it's that long-standing joke where an executive might say, "We're going to use the AI to do something," and it might be something that sounds really outlandish, but we've got to that point where the AI can do some pretty amazing things. So it's just trying to keep ourselves honest in a way.
The last company I worked at, which was 6 years ago now, we used to have the joke when we were, planning on some kind of analytics we were doing that was going to be a very elaborate task to write, I don't know, a lot of SQL and build a lot of data pipelines and blah, blah, blah. We'd always talk about it and then we'd have the joke okay, now we want to do the do analytics button or the do SQL button, this kind of magic button that would just do it all for us, which 6 years ago was a joke, but now feels almost closer to reality with the way we can prompt Claude or ChatGPT to spin up all this code for us. Is that generally a good use case of AI? It's just coding, content generation, good use of Gen AI, I should say.
I'd say it depends on the user and depends on the use case as well. So I think, say, for the non-technical user or someone who just wants to have a benchmark which they can iterate and improve on, I think it's a really valuable tool to see what the size of the opportunity could be. Um, I also feel like, in many ways, that I think for me, AI is really good from an internal efficiency perspective. So it's a bit like an extension to the IDE that you typically use at the moment. You know, things that really boost your productivity. Take the undifferentiated lifting, I think they call it. You know, the things that you just have to do, and it lets you focus on the value add aspect of your role.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see where this goes because I did see a quote, was it maybe from Sam Altman yesterday, who, to be fair, could not be more biased in this regard. But he said something like, as the cost of anything that AI can produce could produce almost costlessly, therefore the value of that thing will be driven to zero through time because AI can just make it infinitely. Um, which then you might start to think about software and the knowledge work and coding and whatnot fitting into that category. Do you feel that sense that like some of your skills, the true value of them might be getting eroded with AI, or do you feel like there's some elements that are not going to be touched by Gen AI anytime soon? What's your thoughts on that?
To be honest, I think there's as AI continues to develop and become more sophisticated, I think pretty much all of the traditional skills that we have come to value are probably going to come into question. And then it's about us understanding where we can continue to add value and where we should try to develop so that we can maintain our ability to actually do our jobs.
And when I speak to people about this, they normally say, well, that is the people skills, I guess. Stakeholder management, influencing skills, sales skills, keeping people honest, keeping people happy. Is that the thing that AI can't really take away from us anytime soon? Or is there other things, maybe more just pure creativity or kind of unstructured problem solving? Where do you think is kind of AI is not going to touch anytime soon?
So it's one of those where I've been surprised before, but I'd say at the moment, yeah, those are the areas where I'd say a qualified and talented individual does definitely have the edge over AI. But it wouldn't surprise me if that started becoming a thing that was harder to distinguish. Anecdotally, I've met people who see more AI than AI itself, and vice versa. So you never know.
And what does that mean? People who are particularly robotic or talking cliches, or
Yeah, some very robotic people and some very expressive AI.
I'd like to meet these characters. Well, at some point, maybe it'll become impossible to differentiate. If we have our own AI avatars, you won't know whether you're talking to Tim or Timbot, maybe in the future.
Amazing.
Uh, well, that's maybe a little way off at the moment. I should think and hope. What about in terms of how you think about bringing it back down to reality of delivering business value for your projects and making sure that whatever work you're doing is kind of connected with those business goals. How do you think about the problem? Do you have any kind of strategies in that space?
So I think from my perspective, it's about having allies. So you sort of being in the conversation, being relevant, and understanding what your key stakeholders need. I think maybe we've all been in that situation where we have a solution and we're looking for a problem, and that's the exact situation where we shouldn't be.
Yes, I would always have agreed with that. But then I've heard of a few companies recently that wanting to go on and on about Gen AI, where they've told their organization, they've basically said, hey, let's stop working for the next month. Don't do any tasks, don't do anything. We just want you to sit there and think about how you can adopt Claude or ChatGPT or whatever it is in your day to day job, which is kind of like a solution looking for a problem. But I feel like they probably justify it because the technology is so potentially incredible and powerful. If you don't carve out time to sit down and think about how to apply this in your role, you'll always keep doing things in this way that's now automatable potentially. And so maybe there's some argument to say, well, yeah, let's just throw the AI solution at a bunch of things because, yeah, half of it might be irrelevant, but for half of it, it will stick. Is there some merit to that, do you think, if the technology is just improving so quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm definitely a fan of having a commitment to R&D and just the time to actually breathe. As and I guess another pitfall is just being stuck in your day job and doing the same thing over and over. It's about how to move the business forward in a meaningful way. I think being able to do that is really valuable. I think on the flip side, there probably comes a point where people are asking, where's the value add? I think that's the point where you'd have to ensure that you have something to deliver.
And I know one thing we've tried in the past on this space, or in this space, sorry, was hackathons, where we do maybe 2, 3, 4 day hackathon where each engineer could just work on whatever they thought was best as a way for them to really put their stamp on things and get things into the product. And so it was a little bit less biased than, let's say, me deciding what we needed to do. Um, have you tried that approach, or have you seen any other approaches work well?
Yes, so also a really big fan of having team hackathons as well. So one thing I found is maybe it's a bit unexpected is how not only do you get the time to focus on an innovative problem or innovative solution to a problem, you also learn more about your own team than you would doing the day job because you start seeing the creativity, the ideas, and that team dynamic can really benefit from having these events.
And so it's almost by like removing their constraints, you start to see them flourish in a way that you wouldn't otherwise have seen.
Yeah, for that reason, I think it's really valuable to exercise that type of dynamic in a team.
Yeah. And a few other things I've noticed about hackathons that were really helpful for us was one was just the time pressure. So what's that? I think there's a law, Parkinson's law. That's right. That work expands to fill the time available for it. And so having this deadline, like you have to ship by this time, we're going to invite judges in to do the judging. There's like prize money on the table. So it's like a forcing function to make people just solve the problems faster. It's really incredible. I've often thought about how that could be incorporated into day-to-day work and life, because this is nothing like a deadline to make you ship stuff quickly.
Yeah, it's the absolute distillation of the whole MVP concept.
Yes, absolutely. And when you guys have run your hackathons, um, uh, what was the end goal? Were you trying to create a prototype? Were you trying to ship real product? Yeah, what was the kind of goal of those?
So I guess we have a number of, um, depending on the particular hackathon, we set a specific objective. So that we have cases where we'll set a learning objective. As a team, we'll try to do something new that none of us know much about. We have ones that are uh, project based, but not necessarily work related. So we'll take something that we've seen or something that someone's thought of. We say, let's try it out. Let's put a twist on that. And then we have ones that are more work focused with a clear application in mind.
And do you do them in teams, or people do their own projects? How have you done it in the past?
So we tend to work in a team. Sometimes we'd get guests from other teams. So maybe it's someone from a product team, someone from a sister engineering function, just to sort of bring a different skill set in from the immediate data team's skill set.
Yeah, those cross-functional teams can be interesting in a hackathon. Sometimes might make it a little bit harder to coordinate, but yeah, there's definitely like a value add, I guess, of having those different perspectives involved.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing we'd done was we had, yeah, either had a theme of the hackathon. So I think some themes in the past we've had were like around our values. So it might be one of our values is around fairness, so making it a fairer platform for candidates to use, and so that everyone had to somehow have a project that was aligned to that overall theme. Other times, though, we'd left it completely open ended and said, you can work on literally anything you want. Doesn't matter. You have full reign. You can do whatever you think is best. It's interesting how, in the first scenario, even though there's a bit of a constraint, that constraint almost helped people to narrow their thinking of what they were going to do. When we left it completely open, people were like, "Well, there's just too many opportunities." It's like walking into, I don't know, a massive supermarket. You can have anything. Like, you need to refine it a little bit, otherwise it was overwhelming. Had you found something similar?
Yeah, it's that whole yeah, that whole saying where they say that limitations breed creativity or something along those lines. I agree.
Yeah, for sure. One thing we'd also done, which was kind of cool, was we invite external judges. So we'd have some of our customers or industry people come in to just the demo sessions. So our engineers would work for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, sometimes with very little sleep. And then they'd come for this hour demo session. So they get maybe a few minutes each to demo their product they built, which is really nice. Um, and then the external guests, I like that because they provided this almost unbiased view, because they didn't know the engineers, they didn't know the details of what we'd done in the past, and blah 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 blah. They just came at it with this fresh perspective, and it was very interesting to see that I could never predict who the guests were going to choose as the winner. Like, every single person in my head as I was watching the presentations, like, oh, I would pick that winner, or I think the guests will pick this one. I was wrong every single time. So it was fascinating to just to get other people's views. And like, oh wow, I didn't see that perspective at all. Um, when you've done hackathons, do you have some kind of demo presentation to finish it up? Do you have some kind of yeah, celebration or prize money or prizes or anything like that?
It's funny you should mention that because recently I'd say not really, no, but that does ring a bell. Back in my previous role at Lloyd's Banking Group, they were very competition based, the hackathons, and I think it brings a really fun element because I think that it gives you that incentive to put your best foot forward when you present it and present it in a compelling way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a nice upside. One interesting thing we had with our hackathons also was we had a rule, which is, I think, pretty unusual for hackathons, is to be eligible to win, your feature has to be live on the production website, which in 3 days is a pretty amazing turnaround from idea to shipped without breaking the entire product. And we did that as a forcing function again to go, well, you're going to have to somehow make this such that it actually works with real users. It's not just like a vague idea or whatever. Um, for your hackathons, did you do it that way, or was it more like a prototype was the end output?
It was always like a prototype type thing. Though hearing what you just said, yeah, that sounds like a high stakes situation.
It is high stakes, and it makes it, yeah, it makes it more difficult. I feel like the proto if we gone down the prototype route, I think we might have gotten more wild ideas. We might have gotten more like an outlier that could have been something amazing, even if it was just a tiny speck of it. And by having the rule, you have to ship it. Maybe we got slightly narrower ideas that were a bit more realistic, a little bit less crazy, but we got shipped product, which is always valuable.
I'm going to make a note of that. That could be good.
Yeah, yeah, it works, I think, well overall. You have to, of course, then have other people available to actually do the QA testing, do the testing on staging, be able to run your QA tests or your automated tests to then ship it without breaking the entire infrastructure. So it does require a little bit of that, and also, yeah, a little bit more risk tolerance, I guess, in shipping product really quickly. But yeah, I think it worked overall for us really well. We've got loads of features in our product now that are used that were um, hackathon projects initially, including, actually, because this is a nice segue, including our AI CV screening tool, which was a hackathon project, well, probably 2 years ago now. It's from one of the early versions of ChatGPT. Uh, do you currently use any AI in your hiring process, on the hiring side of things?
It's funny. So, me personally, no, not really. It's probably a bad thing to say given my role, but I can't really speak in terms of the initial screening process that happens with our in-house recruitment team. But personally, I don't see the requirement. I don't see the need just yet. I think it's for, I guess, three reasons from my end. one being scale. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, we do recruit for fairly specialized roles. And for that reason, we don't receive nearly enough applications for me to start thinking that I need something to help me cope with the scale. And the second is around team fit. So I think it's that thing where it's not really one size fits all. And I like to be able to review applications for myself and make that judgment. And I guess the third is around just courtesy, because I feel like if someone takes the time and the effort to apply for a role, I'd like to repay that in kind and give it the proper consideration. But having said that, I'm keen to keep an open mind though. But and I guess as long as we're mindful about what does transparency look like in terms of using AI in the recruitment screening process, and I'm keen to avoid the situation where bigger number is better. When you're looking at applications, someone's got 10 years Python experience. Does that make them more eligible than a 5-year experienced candidate? Maybe, maybe not.
What about if you had, like, would you ever consider just using your own prompts to ChatGPT and say, well, here you go, here's these, hey, ChatGPT, here's these 100 CVs I've got. This is exactly what I'm looking for. You know, here's the red flags, here's the green flags, here's the type of typical person who might look good, but I don't want. Here's the kind of person who might not look good on paper that I do want. Like imagine some kind of really elaborate prompt that is just distilling exactly what you're looking for into an AI. Have you ever considered trying that, or is it still just the volume is so low it's not even worth it?
Yeah, I think it's just that. It's around if I was ever dealing with that type of volume, I think having that ability to summarize would be amazing. But at the moment, I think we're okay just reviewing them case by case.
And what about on the candidate side? Have you started to notice candidates using it either in terms of creating their CV or taking tests or in an interview?
Definitely. So I guess embarrassingly on their part, but my part as well. We once interviewed a candidate who we asked to prepare a presentation, and I think the presentation was largely AI generated, even to the point where it had a different company's name on the presentation. So I think that there's that kind of pitfall where people aren't really they're not giving the application due consideration. Um, I guess bringing it back though, I find with all these tools that are out there, it's becoming quite difficult to actually differentiate candidates in a meaningful way. And I think maybe part of that is a learned behavior, because maybe these people think that that's what hiring managers want to see from them. They want to hit the keywords, the key qualifications. They want things to read the same, professional. And I think it's up to recruiters and companies who are hiring to actually set that tone, set that expectation. That is not maybe that's not always what we want to see.
Yeah, it is such a tricky scenario, I think, for candidates in this market because, especially in some geographies, United States especially, if you're a candidate for a data analyst or data scientist role, you're looking at the ad, you're seeing, wow, 1,000 applicants in a day. My God, that is a lot of competition. I thought I had to apply for, I don't know, 50 jobs to get 2 interviews. Now I think I have to apply to 500 to get 2 interviews because there's just such a huge volume. So then I assume they're then using these tools to either, here you go, here's these 50 job ads, rewrite my CV for these 50 job ads, or just apply automatically to jobs. But in doing that, they're almost undermining themselves because, as you say, they're all starting to look the same. If they've all been customized or tailored based on the same job ad with the same AI, it's inevitable it'll all start to sound like much of a muchness.
Yeah, and it's that thing because I don't really have an answer to it, but it doesn't help people. It doesn't help me find the people who have the skills that really matter to me. Things like problem solving, how do they respond to challenge and adversity, what's their resilience to setbacks, yeah, that sort of thing. I think the rest of the application process needs to uncover that.
Yeah, and that's the kinds of things you just can't tell from a CV at the end of the day. I wonder if part of the challenge or part of the solution maybe is going to be to unlock a new, better quality data set than a CV. Because even before AI, anyone could put anything on a CV. I could claim to be a rocket scientist. Can't really tell me I'm not until you've gotten me to maybe that interview stage and started to give me questions about physics and realized I knew nothing. But at the CV stage, you kind of just have to take people's word for it at a certain level. Maybe we need some new data set to do the screening with.
Yeah, agree. I think for me, it's not the answer. So I think we're quite conventional at equals in terms of our interview process. So we'll have a technical element followed by a competency-based interview, maybe a couple of other stages after that. But I think there's no substitute for like a real conversation, because I think it really gives you that ability to gauge a person's experience. They might have the 10 years Python or SQL experience that I mentioned, but what happens when the numbers don't look right? How do they deconstruct or unpick a problem? And I think for me, aside from talking about successes, I also like to put due emphasis on the things that didn't go so well, and the learnings that they took from it, that sort of thing.
And when you're going down that path in the interview, what would be considered from your perspective good answers or bad answers to that kind of when did you fail and how did you learn from it? If you think about the candidates who did well and not so well with that question.
It's a good question, really. I think for me, it's just seeing that a candidate is willing to have that conversation. It's a bit like that question around what your strengths, what your weaknesses, and you'll always get the like the tried and true answer, like I'm a perfectionist. That's my weakness.
So that would be a red flag if someone said that.
Yeah, it's a bit too prepared. It's not really telling me anything.
The other one I like is, I mean, maybe it's an extension of this theme, but it's wrapping a strength and a weakness. So it's a very thinly veiled strength. That ends up being working too hard or caring too much or something like that. But it's presented in this negative way initially, but then you think, hang on, well, what are you talking about? That's a strength. Yeah, I want to know your actual weakness.
Yeah, it's that thing. If I was working with the person, I kind of want them to be honest with me rather than kind of wrapping it up and being like, "Oh."
Yeah, that one's really tricky, isn't it? And I personally feel like hiring in general could be improved a lot if both parties were as honest and transparent, down to almost being brutally honest as early as possible, because then you could kind of filter each other out as soon as possible. Do you take that approach, or do you feel like there needs to be a bit more of a kind of dance involved in hiring?
No, I'm all for an honest and candid conversation. And you're right about the two-way dialogue, because I think as much as we're looking for the right candidate, we also want to make sure that the candidate's going to be happy in the role, make sure the company's right for them.
Yeah, and there's no point stringing a candidate along. This is why I sometimes get slightly worried when I hear about um, in like talent attraction, candidate marketing, these kinds of things, which is fine. Of course, we have to attract the best quality candidates to our job. That's fine. But when I hear about marketing and sales, or recruitment as a sales process, to me, that gets me a little bit thinking about, oh, are we really being honest, or are we trying to, massage this job and make it seem as though it's something that's not, which I think is a very short run game, because the candidate will get in on day one and realize, hang on, you told me this was 80% data science and 20% reporting, and it's 80% reporting, 20% data science. And they're going to be pretty annoyed pretty quickly. Um, so I feel like, the more honest both parties can be, the better off we'll be able to save everyone a lot of time.
Yeah. I think the only kind of sales that you should be doing to advertise a role is just getting that exposure out there to say, look, there's a role here and it's XYZ.
Yeah, exactly. So getting that top of the funnel eyeballs on the job ad, and if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. Um, I agree with that, and I can tell you from my own experience. Speaking of learning from our mistakes, the two people I hired first, which was now 11 years ago, I was a senior analyst with a company and looking to hire an analyst, commercial analyst. And I was operating in what I'd call Excel hell. So this is, the idea of a data warehouse was anathema to them. It was just a lot of spreadsheets being sent around all the time to do all this kind of basic reporting. It was hellish. Uh, Part of the reason I wanted to hire an analyst to start taking care of some of this manual reporting so I could do something slightly more interesting. And I remember we sold the role as maybe more than what it was. And we said, oh, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of interesting data sets about this, which was true. But realistically, the person coming in still had to deal with a lot of crap and had to probably spend several months automating some of this crap so that we could do something actually interesting. And I didn't really sell it that way. And the first candidate lasted 1 week, and the second lasted 2 days. So that was about as bad an introduction to hiring as you could possibly imagine. And from that point forward, I feel like I was much more honest, brutally so.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think there's no hiding, the fact that most roles do come with the good and the bad. I guess the only success I've had in hiring for those types of roles is, if budget willing, is saying that this is the role that you're coming into, but I'm also looking for a way out or way you forward. Help them, ask them to help you define what that good looks like going forwards.
Right. So you're really trying to get into the specifics of the career growth rather than just a general answer. You're like, okay, this is the exact role you could maybe move into in this period of time. What do you think about that? Is that the conversation you have with them?
Yeah, it's that whole ownership and accountability piece where it's like, you're coming into this, but with my help, we're going to build something better, or we're going to move it forwards in a certain way. And then hopefully that gets them motivated or invested enough to stick around.
And yeah, this transparency I think is so important on both sides. And part of the issue of hiring is that it's not that common on the candidate side to be brutally honest in your own CV. This is part of the reason why CV screening is so inaccurate, why everyone's complaining about getting inundated with random CVs. Like I spoke to someone just an hour ago who put up a job for a data scientist, got 2,000 applications within a day. 99% of them are fundamentally irrelevant, like getting applications from teachers, from chefs, from people with not really any crossover in advanced data science skills at all, because it's an open job market, because anyone can just hit that quick apply button on LinkedIn or whatever. So I feel like, yeah, candidates obviously need to be honest as well. I can think of someone I interviewed recently who said that they had hired a data analyst who said they had advanced SQL skills, gone in on day one and said, yeah, nah, I I don't know SQL at all. So we're going to have to deal with this problem together. Now, to the credit of this candidate, they actually upskilled very quickly because they were motivated and interested, and they played a game and like, well, I'm going to lie to get this job, but once I've got it, then I'm going to make the most of it. So it worked out in the end, but yeah, surely if we were just more honest with each other, we'd all be better off.
It definitely personality type. I don't think I could ever, sort of black my way into a job like that. I wouldn't have the nerve.
Neither would I. And that's when I hear about some candidates. In fact, I saw a video just yesterday, someone tagged me in it, of a candidate doing an interview on Google Meet where they had some kind of tool to implant their face on the face of the person doing the interview. And it was very obvious because, as they moved their head slightly, the face was imperfectly over their face, the avatar. Uh, I don't think I could do that either. Like I don't have the balls of steel to try to fake my way through that kind of process. I'd rather just be honest with people.
Yeah, props for creativity, but yeah, definitely don't know.
Yeah, and I see other candidates here clearly using an LLM model on another monitor where they've got the audio coming out of the computer and then it's trying to answer it and they're kind of looking back and forth to me, that also makes it more complicated. It's pretty hard to focus on an interview and their question and then solve the problem. If I'm now introducing a stream of text from an LLM, it's like, God, that's another input. This is just making my life harder as a candidate, not easier.
Yeah, and it's that thing too because I guess in the day job, people will have access to tools like that, and so there is that question about is it bad to be using those tools? What I would say is that someone who's preoccupied with using such things in an interview, it comes across less engaging. They have less rapport, and I don't think it helps them.
Right. It's just, yeah, not even purely about the quality of the answers to the questions. It's the metadata almost of, as you say, their focus or lack thereof, and building that relationship, which probably is at least as important in a factor in getting the job or not.
And it's that things. We keep coming back to it, but I 100% am sort of like a people first type recruiter in that sense, where I'm looking for people who will be a good team fit. And think in reality, I spend more time with my team than I do with my own family. So I need to be able to get on with them. Yeah, they need to be happy where they are. It's that sort of situation.
And how do you evaluate that? I assume that's mainly in the interview stage where you're looking for that team fit.
Yeah, just looking for the right kind of dialogue for people who have a certain level of experience that when you talk to them, that they've dealt with similar things before. They know what I'm talking about. They also know what the role entails. Should they take it? Should they be successful?
And you mentioned team fit. So is it? Do you think of almost having like a portfolio of skills you need in your team overall, and then finding people to add the bits that are missing?
Yes, so I think team fit comes. There's a skills and a functional aspect to it, but then there's also like a personality and EQ element to it. I think the best example I had is it was actually my first role at MBNA slash Bank of America, but my manager at the time is also probably the most influential person in my career. He had like these three team values that, and he used to repeat them all the time. And in this instance, it was conscientiousness, diligence, and fun. So he was talking about like your conscientiousness. You need to be willing to do the right thing. Diligence was around working hard and taking care of the results that you deliver. And fun, I guess, was his way of talking about team fit from a cultural perspective. And that's not just about being polite, being nice to people, but it was about putting energy, actually contributing to make it a better place to work. And it's funny because, decades later after that role, I still see posts from people who I used to work with, and they always say like, those were the best days, of any career. So there must be something to it.
Yeah. And who was this manager? I feel like we should give them a shout out.
Oh yeah, so shout out to Ian Grime, definitely probably the most influential person to my whole career. He gave me my first job.
He gave you your chance and your start, and it sounds like he had a very clear vision of how he wanted his, like, the environment of his team to be, and it sounds like that's something you've also carried forward into your team.
Yeah, I think about it every day, as bad as that sounds.
That's good. That's not bad. That's good. Yeah, as you say, you're a people oriented hirer and manager, I guess. Um, uh, One challenge with that, I think, is, like, in general, when we talk about hiring for values and hiring for like a cultural fit, is that sometimes I think that could almost be at odds with diversity of thought, in the sense that you could almost start to look at people who, yeah, have this consistent set of values, but sometimes you might want someone who's like just out of left field, is going to come in and cause a bit of a ruckus, is maybe going to ruffle a few feathers, is maybe going to operate in a very different way. Is there any value to that, or would you rather have people who have that kind of common alignment of values?
Oh yeah, so it's funny that because when I talk about a team fit, I guess the way I see it, it's not. is not to the exclusion of people from that left field. Um, we actually have quite a diverse team. No matter how you slice it, in terms of the whole people coming from different backgrounds, different career experiences, different walks of life. We have a few that have made a big impact. Um, One of my senior analysts, or the senior analyst in my team, came from a retail management role. And it turns out he's absolutely fantastic at dealing with tough stakeholders and he's really organized. I guess, stands to reason. Second example is I have a lead BI specialist who's from a different industry altogether. So it's not financial services, but I find that she approaches her analytics from a storytelling perspective. That's quite refreshing. And she brings a lot of discipline and rigor to the planning and design phase up front.
Right. And so you've really tapped into some of those kind of unique backgrounds and leveraged them in the team, which is awesome. Uh, One thing I think is also tricky once we start to get into these almost subjective areas. So we start to get away from just evaluating XYZ skill. I've measured your SQL skills, I've measured your Python, your stats knowledge, whatever. Just kind of, you can measure it pretty well, like it's black and white ish. But then you start to get into, let's say, softer skills like communication or some of these values, is that it's just inherently a bit more subjective. Do you try to measure any of these things in the hiring process, or is it a sort of intuitive feeling around the person's skills or values fit?
It's because I haven't actually tried measuring it, um, though. I guess there are ways around. There are ways that exist that do that sort of thing. What I find is that I think candidates who I find promising, so it's almost like they need to pass the technical component to be in consideration, but then is a point of having that competency, values, and behaviors type conversation with myself, with members from my team. I also like to have interviews with them, getting to meet some of our key stakeholders in the wider organization. It's just around how quickly can you build that rapport, and when people feel like they'd be a good person that they want to work with.
And so you get this quite holistic view of the candidate then if you've gotten all these different people's view on them.
Yeah, and I think it's that there's that two-way benefit where the candidate also gets a feel for the culture of the company and whether they want to work with those people too.
Yeah, it de-risks it, I guess, for both sides, isn't it? If you meet more people throughout the process.
And then should they join the company, they also, they come into a more familiar environment because they've already met these people.
Yeah, that's right. A few friendly faces doesn't hurt, especially for introverts. I know if I joined a company and I'd already met 10 of the people, it would make it a lot more comfortable for me than going into a room full of complete strangers.
Yeah, and I think it speeds up that kind of going up the learning curve.
Yeah, 100%. What about broadly speaking about um, making hiring a little bit more fairer, a little bit more objective? Is there any ways that you have to do that throughout your hiring process?
So it's one of those where we have a standard set of exercises of questions for the technical element. We'll have a standard set of questions that we'll go through for the competency based values and behaviors section. But then I think a lot of that conversation is organic in terms of depending on the responses that we get from the candidate or their particular experiences, we'll probably go down different paths of that conversation. And I think that goes back to the sentiment I have around the application process needs to be fair, but not necessarily the same. Fair doesn't mean the same.
And so, for example, that might mean someone who, let's take an example, someone is vision impaired, giving them some kind of online test or some kind of online thing that requires them to do that would clearly be unfair. So you can change the process to accommodate them to then rebalance it. Is that a fair example?
100%, yeah. I think it's for me, and it goes back to my point about being as people oriented as would make sense is how do we make the conditions for someone to show their value.
So it's really about unlocking that. Yeah, it's hard to do. I feel like, yeah, running those structured interviews and doing it in a consistent way does make it easier to compare candidates, and you've kind of given everyone a similar opportunity, arguably. But then it's also there's almost like a constraint to it inherently, like the structure to it. Then sometimes might prevent someone from really shining, and if you didn't have a really free flowing conversation, it'd be hard for them to kind of show that little spark of amazingness.
Yeah. So it's that thing where we have standard interview structures which act as the guardrails, but we kind of just ad lib at times as well.
Right. So you got a bit of both, almost the best of both worlds in some ways.
Hopefully, yeah.
Uh, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
I'd say what is your go-to interview question? I'd say.
Nice. We'll level that. Do you have a go-to interview question, one that we can discuss, and you wouldn't consider it being leaked?
So yes, to be honest, mine's probably pretty boring, but it really is. It's just tell me about yourself. I think it's sufficiently open-ended that it puts the onus on them to add the structure, literally to make something from nothing. But it also hopefully it starts the interview on the right foot about you showing interest in them.
That's a good one. Nice. Okay. Well, Hoa, I might start my next interview with that very question with our next guest and see how they answer it. I'm looking forward to what they say. It's been an interesting conversation today. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts with our audience.
Hey, thank you, and I appreciate your time, Tim, and thanks for having me on.